This video is brought to you by the lovely guys over at Robotoys. For all your Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff desires, Robotoys has you covered. For 10% off, use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout. Now on to today's diagnosis.
Read the disclaimer! On the other one, you bastard!
Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and welcome to part 5 of Seacons Week! In terms of the limbs, we've discussed the beginning of the lineup, we've discussed the worst, we've discussed the best, but what about the blandest? We are by no means discussing a bad figure today, but this figure doesn't seem to strive for the same excellence as the rest do. And I mean, I suppose it doesn't have to, it's the second land shark out of the whole line, so most of the work has been done for them. But it's funny though, in any other group, he would be the weirdo. But I suppose that's a testament to how weird the Seacons truly are. As boring as the general figure is, I will give it some credit. It easily has the best colour scheme out of the whole set. It reminds me of the sort of 90s playground for preschoolers, only they've hired Will Smith for a birthday party. You might think that given the original was released in 1988, he was ahead of the curve, but this doesn't seem to resemble the original toy or the Master Force anime. I suppose it's kind of the same colours, but the saturation has been turned way up, and the positioning of the colours puts a far greater emphasis on the turquoise. Perhaps the colour placement is a necessity due to the original mould, but whatever it is, I f***ing love it. That said, I'm not entirely in love with the Beast mode as a whole. It is very well designed, and there aren't that many gaps or undertooled sections, which were mostly attributed to Kraken and Lobclaw, but there's really not much going for him, even more so than Gulf. The head is painted to a very high quality, with again piercing yellow eyes, and thankfully get the return of the red on the inside of the mouth, accented by sharp silver teeth, but even then, there seems to be something missing from said eyes. It almost looks like he's squinting, as opposed to being angry. The limbs are alright on their own, but I feel they don't quite fit with the overall aesthetic. The legs seem far too dumpy, and the feet are comically oversized. Yes, that's a flaw that stems from the retooling of the original mold, but even then I feel they massively overcompensated. Then you have the arms, which have been flat out reused from the original. Given that they changed the way the paint is laid out, it draws a lot of unnecessary attention to the fists. The original had the whole thing in blue, so I'm not sure why this new version has both purple and pink. Were they not on the same runner? It's so weird. But even aside from that, considering the way the body is set up, the downward facing arms just don't work. I'm typically not one to prefer the G1 way of doing things, but in this instance the original toy really had the better idea. Problem is you can't do it on this version as you're left with hollow sections on the outside. I've mentioned this many times, I'm completely fine with minimal hollowness as long as it's on the inside or the back, but having it on the outside is just unacceptable in my book. Still, it's doubtful anyone will make gap fillers. It would be nice if they did, but I don't think anyone's interested. Articulation remains roughly the same as the Rippersnapper version, with ball-jointed shoulders and elbows and a wrist swivel. The legs also have a ball joint and a hinge. They do have a tendency to pop off though, which is pretty annoying. You can also open the jaw and kind of move the tail around a bit like the original, but the tail sadly doesn't lock in place. It's a real shame that they didn't bother to fix that issue on this newer version. Massively missed opportunity. Accessory-wise, you get roughly the same combining knife that came with Gulf. The only difference here is that it's molded in turquoise as opposed to dark blue. It's painted identically though, so there won't be any issues when putting them together. Also, like Gulf, you can use the Prime Master port to store it under the body, and big surprise, it's passable but not seamless. Following that, you get another combiner hand, and this time the storage actually works quite well. It's easily the best storage out of the whole set, but only because of the work the original mold put in. Finally, you only get one gun this time. I suppose it's nice that they aren't going overboard, but on all the robots to scale back on, they picked one of the ones that happen to have two ports on the side of his head. It's really disappointing, especially considering that the top-mounted port looks incredibly stupid. Size-wise, he's a smidge longer than your standard combiner limb, and definitely has some more heft to him than the original Rippersnapper. That said, I do kind of prefer the more streamlined Rippersnapper look. It's not a bad retool by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I'd say that these figures are kind of on par with each other, but a few minor issues prevent it from truly shining as its own thing, in my opinion. Overbite's transformation is somewhat annoying in certain places, despite the fact that the source material he draws from really isn't, so he doesn't really have any reason to be, but oh well, that's how it is. First thing you want to do is just peg the beast feet in. You've got a slot there and a peg there, and they just peg together like so. You unfortunately can't actually get them to fold down and peg in, because one, it would go over the edge, and two, they just don't fit anyway. The beast foot actively bumps against the robot foot there, so it physically doesn't work. You're going to want to open up the beast head before you open up the robot legs, unfortunately. That'll just give you enough clearance there, and then after that you can bring these open and do the whole Combiner Wars style leg extendo themed jiggy, and they just peg together as per normal. And before separating, you take the double hinge and lock it into there, and that will actually potentially push them aside anyway. But my copy has a slight QC issue. This part here is a bit mangled and doesn't fully go all the way in. But that's the one QC issue of the entire set, so it's really nothing. They've got some pretty good QC on these figures. If you haven't already, close that up. You've got the double hinge over here, and that'll allow you to peg it in here, although there's a double hinge there and there's a hinge there, so I suppose it's a triple hinge. You just rotate this a bit. Come on, done again. Bring the arms down like so. Rotate the wrists into position. And the head pops around like so. Easy peasy piece of cake. And I mean, even if the robot mode is a smidge boring, at least the colours are great, and because of the feet at the back there, he's not weighted incorrectly, so that's a start. The results present in robot mode are very similar to that of the beast mode. The colours are absolutely lovely, but the actual design is at least somewhat problematic. Granted, there aren't as many issues as there were in beast mode, but there are still quite a few substantial ones. But first, the good. The head sculpt is stunning. It doesn't really have that much paint on it, but it's easily one of the best out of the set. Although maybe I just like it because it reminds me of Lobclaws. I still prefer Lobclaws though. Despite not exhibiting as much color breakup as the original, I do think the color choices and general paint on the newer chest work far better. I mean, I could have gone for some vent detail, but the purple still really does it for me. The arms are also much better here than they were in beast mode. I still don't know why they didn't just keep them all the same color like they did with Ripper Snapper, but at least it works in this instance. Not so sure about the pink blades though, seems a little odd. But with all that aside, it's still got two fairly major flaws that massively bring down the overall level of quality. The first, and arguably lesser, is the kibble on the legs. I don't know why I find these more annoying than any of the other figures, but the leg kibble is, well, I did just say annoying. What's weird is this never was an issue with the original, since it was able to fold up properly. You can't do that on this version though, as not only would they hit the ground, but they don't fit at all. Then we move on to the backpack. Not only is it a nightmare to get in place, but it doesn't even stay there. You just rotate this a bit. Come on, done again. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That's going to be a bit of trouble. Even ignoring how ugly it looks, the connection ports are far too loose, and it's not helped by the fact that the hinges on said backpack are incredibly floppy. It works fine in static poses, but once you start to pose this guy, it all comes crumbling apart. Don't get me wrong, this and the legs are nowhere near as bad as some of the other issues of this combiner set, but I still can't help but feel Overbite was a smidge undercooked. Not as much as Kraken, thankfully though. Maybe it's just because his Wavemate was given much more of a retooling budget, but that's just a guess. Regardless, he's not bad as a robot, but I feel they just stopped a bit short. His articulation remains mostly the same as Golf, so go check that video if you want more details. The only main difference is the inclusion of wrist swivels due to transformation. It's a nice-ish touch, but I feel for designs like these, it doesn't quite get across that much expression. Unfortunately, given the nature of his hands, he isn't quite able to use the combiner knife to its full potential. There's no way to move the fists down, so he can't hold it upwards, and there's no 5mm peg on the underside of his hands thanks to the transformation scheme, so he can't undersling it. This means whichever way you slice it, or rather not slice it, the blunt edge will always be facing forward. This is incredibly stupid and makes me wonder why they didn't just give him the other axe and give the knife to Tentakill instead, especially considering Tentakill's fists are molded in such a way that allow for the knife to be properly held. At least the gun works alright. It's probably the best gun out of the whole set too, so at least he's got that going for him. Oh dear, I forgot all about the size comparison shots. Oh no! Moving on to his other three configurations. His leg mode is fine, I guess. It's one of the weaker ones of the set, but definitely not the worst. The color separation does make the arms stand out a little bit more than the original though, and there's nowhere to put the gun. They really cheaped out on this particular form of weapon integration, but it'll make sense why in a moment. The arm mode, on the other hand, is genuinely bad. The shoulder mass is ridiculous, and the bestial feet make the wrist fail right out of the gate. But I suppose given how messy it is, at least the gun storage blends right in with the ridiculousness. Woohoo for that! But neither of those are his intended modes. According to the stock photography, his primary combination is the Target Master system. Maybe this is Stockholm Syndrome, and I'm really hoping it isn't, but honestly, it's not terrible. I go as far as saying that out of the members I reviewed so far, he easily has the best gun mode. I mean, you still have to deal with this incredibly messy back section, but there's a fan mode that makes it slightly better. Does it lock in properly? No, but it doesn't flop around either. Even the feet on the front don't look god-awful. They're still bad, but at least not god-awful. So hey, at least it did its job. Takara can give themselves a pat on the back. Except that's all it does, its job. It's acceptable for what it's meant to do, but where a lot of the other Seacons go above the Call of Duty, Overbite just aims a little too low for my tastes. I still pick him over Kraken any day, but come on man, try a little harder. Ultimately, I can't give Overbite a bad score, because where it counts, he does succeed. But succeeding is all he does. He never truly excels like many of the other members do. He's still definitely worth the $60, at least more so than Kraken, but he is teetering on the edge of a 2 out of 5. He ultimately doesn't quite get that bad score, but he is very, very close. All I have to say is that it's incredibly lucky that he has these brilliant colours, because otherwise there's just not that much going for him. But you'll probably need him if you ever want to make a full King Poseidon combiner, so if these ever happen to come back into stock, make sure to check out today's sponsor, Robotoys. Robotoys specialises in Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff figures, and don't forget, if you haven't already, make sure to use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout for 10% off a single order. It's a one-time use code. Who knows, Takara might reissue these guys at a later date, or they might come out with a God Neptune. They'll probably come out with a God Neptune, who knows. And with that, we are pretty much done. There's only one member left to cover. We've discussed the first, the best, the worst, and the blandest, as well as the torso. But what about the most controversial? See you tomorrow.
Overbite, Overbite, Overbite. No, no, サメサメ。硬いもの見りゃ噛みたがる。強い子、ぶりっ子、シーコンズ。